Hello, and welcome to this American History podcast entitled Growing Tensions Between North and South. In our last podcast, we learned about the women's rights movement and the movement to abolish slavery. In this podcast, we'll be learning about how differences between the North and the South threaten to tear the nation apart. The economies of the North and the South developed differently in the early 1800s. Farming was important in both regions, but the North began to develop more industry and trade than the South. The South instead continued to depend on plantation farming. The growth of industry in the North led to the rapid growth of northern cities. Much of this population growth came from immigration. Many immigrants and Easterners moved west. They built farms in the new states formed from the Northwest Territory. Roads and canals, they linked the North with the Northeast and the Midwest. In the South, it was different. A few wealthy planters controlled Southern society. Their profits came mostly from slave labor. Most slaves worked in the fields to grow crops, and the most important crop, it was cotton. Much Southern wealth came from the exportation or the export of cotton. Planters invested in slaves then instead of industry, and as a result, the South developed very little industry. Most Southern whites were poor farmers who owned no slaves. And poor whites accepted slavery because it kept them off of the bottom of society. All right, so on your paper, you need to entitle it Growing Tensions Between North and South. Okay, so that's the chapter lesson title, Growing Tensions Between North and South. And this particular section, which we just talked about, is North and South take different paths. So jot down the information here, and this will give you some notes that you can use to help review. And when you're ready to go on, just hit play. The issue of slavery caused tensions between the North and South. The anti-slavery movement was gaining in strength in the North in the 1800s. Now, many Northern workers and immigrants opposed slavery. But here's why. They feared that slaves who did not work for pay would end up taking away their jobs, because they felt like employers would rather have slaves who they didn't have to pay than to have workers who they did. So that's really why Northern workers and immigrants opposed slavery. They saw it as a threat to their jobs. So although they opposed slavery, most Northerners were racist by today's standards. Let me say that again. Although they were against slavery, most Northerners were racist by today's standards. Many whites refused to go to school with, to work with, or live near African Americans. And in most states, even in free states, African Americans could not vote. Now, white Southerners defended slavery by claiming that white people, first of all, were superior to blacks. And slaveholders claimed that slaves benefited by being introduced to Christianity. They also argued that slaves benefited from slavery by having their food, shelter, and clothing provided for them. Now, these differences added to tension between the North and the South. Okay, here you go. On your notes, now you don't have to write this because you already have this on top of your paper. But in this particular section was entitled Anti-Slavery and Racism. So write these things down, and then you'll hit play, and we'll be ready to go again. Well, the North and the South disagreed whether slavery should be allowed in territories that were not yet states. So, of course, as America is expanding and people are moving west, this is going to become a problem. Because, again, there are going to be these discussions between northern and southern states in Congress about whether or not we should allow slavery in territories. In 1846, Congress debated something called the Wilmot Proviso. This was a bill, and the bill proposed to ban or end slavery or to not allow slavery in any territory that the United States acquired from the war with Mexico. So again, that's going to be the southwestern area of California, New Mexico, Arizona, that whole area down there. Slaveholders, however, argued that slaves were property and thus were protected by the Constitution. Now, as you might guess, Congress was divided along regional lines over the Wilmot Proviso. Northerners supported it, Southerners opposed it. Although it passed the House of Representatives, the Wilmot Proviso never passed the Senate. Southerners had more power in the Senate than in the South. But it wasn't as though the Wilmot Proviso did nothing. The Wilmot Proviso led, even though it was voted down. The Wilmot Proviso led to the formation of the Free Soil Party. This party wanted to stop the expansion of slavery, and it made slavery a key issue in national politics. So those people that were supporting the Wilmot Proviso, when it got rejected, they looked for another way that they could form together and make a difference. So they formed this political party called the Free Soil Party. All right, on your notes, again, you don't need to write this title. I'm just reminding you what this chapter's called. But starting here with Wilmot Proviso, you want to write the rest of this down. Now, if there's something here that you don't understand, go back and watch it again, or make sure you make note, make sure you make a little star or highlight in your notes so you remember to ask me tomorrow in class. All right, hit pause when you're ready to go again, and you know what to do. By 1848, the nation hotly debated how to deal with slavery in the lands gained after the war with Mexico. In 1850, California applied for admission into the Union as a free state. This would make slave states a minority in the Senate. Southerners in Congress opposed the admission of California as a free state. So I've got this equal sign here because I want to remind you that going in California, without California going in, we've got a relative balance. But when you throw California in, you make Southerners, or slave states more precisely, a minority in the Senate. So Senator Henry Clay, a great compromiser of Kentucky, offered a bill, or a compromise, to settle the California problem. To please the North, he proposed to admit California as a free state. But that's not going to sit well with the South. So, of course, we're going to have to give something to the South. So for the South, it included a strong law to help slaveholders recapture runaway slaves. We're going to call this the Fugitive Slave Law, or the Fugitive Slave Act. And the law would also let some territories decide for themselves about slavery. Now, you're going to learn about that in the next lesson. That's called popular sovereignty. But for now, just think of it as some territories are going to get to vote for themselves on whether or not they want slavery. Daniel Webster, a senator from Massachusetts, supported the compromise, and Senator Stephen Douglas of Illinois worked to pass the plan. In September, the plan became law, and we know this now as the Compromise of 1850. So here you go. In your notes, write it down. Controversy over territories, and we've got the Compromise of 1850. When you're done, hit play. So there you have it. Growing tensions between the North and South. In this podcast, we learned about how differences between the North and the South threaten to tear the nation apart. If you've got any questions, make sure you come prepared to class tomorrow to ask those. Other than that, hey, you guys have a great day.